Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about anxious attachment and conflict. So I might just set the scene a little. I do have previous episodes on conflict and anxious attachment, so you can keyword search those if you want to go deeper into that. But let's just set the scene. So for most people with anxious attachment, as I said, there is this combination of oftentimes conflict aversion to a degree. So there might be a tendency to keep the peace, to not want to rock the boat, to kind of walk on eggshells or tiptoe around someone, from this place of, I just have to be easy. I don't want to be too needy. I don't want to be too sensitive. I have to be low maintenance. But of course, we know that's not honest or true. And so internally, the pressure is rising and rising. And you've got all of these internal narratives going on about my partner doesn't care about me. And is it always going to be like this? And what about my needs and all of that? And then eventually, inevitably, something will happen and all of this internal pressure will come flying out. Oftentimes in a way that for your partner who may have no idea of what's going on inside of you, for them it might seem like a total mismatch in terms of what's actually going on in the moment. And of course, as we know, so often when we are really activated or triggered by something, we are responding to so much more than just what is happening in that moment. It comes with the weight of not only our history in that relationship, but our history in previous relationships, our family system. Our wounded parts can really come out with a vengeance when we are triggered in our relationship. So that often happens for anxiously attached people. There can be this big blow up and it can come out as quite attacking and accusatory and blaming. This sense that if I can just convey to you how much pain I'm in and how much pain you are causing me to be in, then you'll change. So if you're not immediately validating of me, then I just have to keep going and keep convincing you, or maybe I escalate so as to convey to you how much pain I'm in so that then it'll finally click for you and then I won't have to be in pain anymore. As we know, that usually doesn't work as much as it can feel like second nature to many of us with that pattern. If you have a more avoidant partner, or even if you have a broadly secure partner, it's not a very productive way of doing conflict. And more often than not, that kind of attacking, critical style can very often elicit defensiveness in someone else, which then leaves the anxious person feeling invalidated and emotionally abandoned, which then leads them to kind of up the ante, and so on and so forth. We know how that goes. So let's go into these 3 tips that I want to give you. Now, these are not going to be a panacea. It's not like you can implement these things and all of a sudden conflict's going to be a cup of tea for you and it's going to be really easy. But I do think that these things can help a lot. So the first one is slow down and say less. Okay. So if you are someone with anxious attachment patterns, you know that you probably go a million miles an hour, both in terms of the internal experience of your body. So physiologically, you're likely to be very much in your sympathetic nervous system, so that fight or flight zone of heart racing, heat. It feels like your body's kind of on fire. You might feel really clenched up and pupils dilated, all of those signs of like a full-blown stress response. And that will be telling you to speed up, do something, do something, do something, right? But that's not really helpful in conflict because your partner is going to perceive you in that way. Imagine if you were interacting with another animal, like a dog, that was really worked up. You're immediately going to respond by feeling like, oh, I need to have my wits about me in interacting with this animal because they're really on edge. Same goes for us, right? We often forget that we too are animals. But that's true, right? That we're very perceptive to each other's nervous system. So if yours is going like full pelt, really hyper activated, very stressed in a fight response, then that's not going to play well. You really need to consciously slow down, consciously fight against that pattern within you. And whether that means taking a break and doing something with that energy that isn't sending it in your partner's direction, like, going for a run or doing something to discharge the energy. Or if you feel you have capacity to, consciously down regulating if you have those tools at your disposal. But either way, just slowing down, right, is really important. Being able to have conflict in a more measured, grounded way is going to make a world of difference. And related to that is say less. Okay, so anxiously attached people typically, and I say this as someone who's so guilty of it, by the time you get into actual conflict with your partner, chances are you have rehearsed what you're going to say. You've had the practice conversation a million times over. Maybe you've been out on a walk and you're talking to yourself about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And all of this stuff, you've given a lot of thought to having that conversation. You've been really like stewing in how aggrieved you feel for a long time prior to voicing it to your partner. And what that means is like when you finally have the stage, when you finally got your opportunity to say this stuff that's been really heavy inside you, usually it all just comes like flying out and you've got a lot of words and you keep talking and you keep trying to say it in the right way so that you can persuade them, so that you can elicit the validation that you're looking for. There might be some protesting in there, all of this stuff, right? But again, you're going at 1,000,000 miles an hour and you just keep talking. And not only is that just kind of a lot to deal with and not particularly helpful, but when we layer over that your avoidant partner doesn't operate in that way. They haven't been rehearsing the conversation. They don't have their full speech prepared, and they are probably going to be really overwhelmed by being hit with that barrage of information and emotion that is coming from you, because their baseline in conflict, and we'll cover this in next week's episode when I talk more about avoidant attachment in conflict, but their baseline in conflict is actually to slow way down. And again, that's a function of their nervous system. That's not something they're trying to do. But they tend to like space out and go numb and kind of be lost for words. And so when you have person A who is speaking at 1,000,000 miles an hour and having a lot of emotion and getting really riled up, and person B who at the best of times struggles to find the right thing to say, those tend not to play very well against each other. So by saying less and slowing down, giving your partner an opportunity to find their words and not feel like they're under attack and under a lot of pressure from someone who's kind of explosive towards them, that's probably going to lead to a much better way of doing things and much more productive, where you're actually likely to be able to hear each other than if you're just bombarding them at 1,000,000 miles an hour with so much analysis and information and opinion and emotion. That's going to be a lot for them to take in. So slow down. A kind of related point to that, which I'll just add quickly before I move on to the next one. If your avoidant partner is silent, you know, you've asked them a question and they're sitting there in silence and it looks like they're kind of thinking about it, try to resist the urge to say, well, aren't you going to say something? Or something like that, right? Getting really impatient with them and wanting them to have the perfectly formulated response or kind of meet you at your pace. I think that can happen a lot. And again, just adds to that sense of like pressure and attack that isn't going to be conducive to a productive conversation. So try to be patient, slow down, say less. Okay, so the next tip that I want to give you on better conflict is keep it to one issue. So I think the temptation can be there for so many anxiously attached people to kind of come in with their whole shopping list of grievances, right? Of all the things they want their partner to change. And I think this stems from that tendency that I spoke about earlier, which is when I have the opportunity, like when we're in conflict, when we're having a serious conversation, that's my window of opportunity to raise all of these things. And because I struggle to raise them in real time, I tend to internalize these little micro ruptures and moments of hurt or disappointment or whatever it might be. And because we file those away and then we stew on them, then when we are in conflict, it's really easy to see that as our moment to then go, hey, but what about this thing? And last week you did this, and you know, I don't think I've forgotten about that, or you know, all of these kind of extraneous things that aren't really directly related to the conversation or the issue at hand. Again, this is generally really counterproductive because your partner is just going to feel like you're not actually trying to solve what we're doing here. You're just trying to attack me, right? I'm trying to meet you in issue number one so we can have a productive conversation about it, but it feels like you just want to fight, right? That's how it's going to feel to the other person when you just kind of jump from lily pad to lily pad in terms of this issue, that issue, all the things that I'm upset with you about that I've been harboring. That's likely going to feel really overwhelming and demoralizing to your partner, particularly if they lean more avoidant, because they're just not going to know how to respond to that, and they're going to feel like a failure. They're going to feel like a disappointment to you. They're going to feel like nothing they do is good enough. There's no point. Why do I bother? Look how upset you are with me all the time. Like nothing I do is enough for you, right? Those are all the sentiments that tend to come from that kind of pattern. So as hard as it is, and I know it is hard because I know you don't want to have these conversations all the time. And so when you do get the opportunity, it is really tempting to just sneak in all of those other things that have been bothering you. Try not to. Try to just let that go and trust that in dealing with the problem at hand, you're much more likely to at least get resolution on one thing. Whereas the more issues you try and incorporate and kind of layer on top of each other, you're probably not going to get anything resolved, and you're going to walk away from that feeling less heard, less validated, less understood, which is obviously not what we want. So keep it to one issue if you can. Okay. The third tip that I want to give you is know when to let things go. So again, it's kind of related to the previous point around keep it to one issue. But for anxiously attached people, the tendency is for these conversations to go on and on. Again, I get it. I can be guilty of that, of never really feeling like it's enough. If my partner is there and says like, yes, I understand, I hear you, it's really hard sometimes to believe like, but do you really understand, right? Do you really hear me? What are we going to do about it, right? There's this difficulty in just accepting the resolution and, not trusting that the issue is resolved or that your partner does really understand you. And so you kind of keep pushing and want to relitigate and reopen every single aspect of the conversation, kind of keep testing. Again, in the same way as when we try and raise a million different issues at once can leave our partner feeling kind of demoralized. I think when we can't just let it go and let near enough be good enough, we're like, wait until we have absolute assurance that we have the perfect solution and we're never going to have to deal with this again. I think that approach can be quite demotivating and discouraging for our partner who might be really genuinely trying to meet us in whatever it is that we're upset about. But when we are kind of dismissing or overlooking their genuine attempts at validating us, at making a commitment to try and do something differently, when we're not really acknowledging them in that, then that can make them feel like, well, I give up, right? Why bother? So I think there is really something to be said for knowing when to just let it go. It doesn't mean that you have to let the issue go forever, but just knowing when to leave the conversation and, allow yourself to take in whatever your partner has said, allow yourself to receive that reassurance rather than doubting it and trying to kind of chip away at it or undermine it. Again, I think that struggle with like really receiving and really feeling comforted by someone is very real among anxiously attached people. As much as we can ask for reassurance, oftentimes we're not very good at taking it in or believing it. So try and see the goodness in what your partner's trying to do. Try and see where they are making an effort to propose a solution, even if you don't think it's the perfect solution. At least honor and acknowledge the effort. That's really much more likely to get you to a more positive overall relational environment. So do try and give your partner the benefit of the doubt. Do try and let things go when you can and bring things back to a place of connection, acknowledgement, appreciation. And, as a kind of little bonus tip at the end, I think it can be really positive, particularly with an avoidant partner who struggles having these conversations at the best of times. Voice your appreciation for them showing up to the conversation. Say, I know that you don't like having these conversations and I really appreciate you staying in this with me. I really appreciate you taking the time to try and understand or hear me out or whatever, because that will help them to feel seen and acknowledged as well. Okay. I hope that's been helpful. I hope it's given you some food for thought. If you're someone who struggles with these things, I know it's really tough. I've been there. Sometimes I still am there. But it's all about just trying something new, taking ownership for the ways in which we contribute to the patterns that we find ourselves in. And even if we change it 1% every time we have one of these conversations, that's progress and worthy of celebration. So as I said, hope it's helpful, sending you lots of love, and make sure to tune in next week for part 2, where I talk about what avoidant attachers can do to improve their conflict experience. Okay, thanks guys.